I oppose the whole idea of forcing courts to give suspended sentences when they should be sending offenders to prison. We all know that it's hard to get sent to prison in the first place, and judges and magistrates do not send people to prison lightly. In fact, they don't send people to prison enough, as far as I can see. So being forced to send even less people to prison is extremely worrying. And this is what my amendments seek to try and address today. Now, Madam Chair, we can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear, so it won't be possible to transform this disastrous bill into a good one. All we can seek to do today is to make it less bad. But be under no illusion, this bill takes a sledgehammer to our justice system and will dismantle law and order in this country. And to call this bill a sentencing bill makes a mockery of us all. It should be called the Avoid a Sentence Bill. For this bill is a slap in the face to victims and will embolden offenders who will quite literally be laughing all their way to their next crime. First, Madam Chair, I will make a bit of progress and then I will. First, Madam Chair, I want to put on the record my support for amendments in the name of my honourable friend, the member for Bexhill and Battle, and the honourable member for Clacton, particularly in relation to the abolition of the Sentencing Council and the deportation of foreign criminals. But because of time constraints, I will speak to the amendments tabled in my name only. I'll give way to the Honourable Lady.
Thank you. I thank the right honourable member for giving way. I just want to go back to a point where she suggested this bill is going to bring law and order into question. As a former prison officer myself, I would say that there was a previous government running our prison system to a boiling point that nearly brought law and order crashing down, including having less than 100 bed spaces available last summer, and maybe a little bit of reflection from the party opposite on what they did to His Majesty's Prison Service whilst they were in office and whilst I was serving would be poignant on this debate today.
I'd like to thank the Honourable Lady for making that point. I'd also like to point out that actually under the last governments, 3 prisons were built, which was HMP Five Wells, HMP Fossway, HMP Millsike. That was adding an extra 8,500 places, and 3 further prisons will also be built. I will indeed.
The active management of the prison service was, of course, hard work, managing it at those levels of occupation. But that hard work was absolutely necessary and much preferable to simply taking a view that we won't have all those criminals in prison at all. The reality is that what we're doing now is much worse.
I agree with the Honourable Member. This is a disgrace of a bill that won't be sending people to prison, and at the same time it will be letting people out of prison. So I will start with amendments 46, 47, 51 and 52, and would change the length of sentence that qualify for these get-out-of-jail-free suspended sentences to ones of less than 12 months, as opposed to 12 months or more, and only before any credit is given for a guilty plea. Sentences of 12 months or more are obviously given for more serious offences than those less than 12 months. Also, as the bill stands, I understand those who will be sentenced to 18-month sentence would be appropriate, and they could hit the jackpot after, because they will take into account the credit of a guilty plea. That will reduce it to 12 months, and therefore they will qualify under this bill for a suspended sentence. People don't get sentences of these lengths for nothing, and so I hope the government will reflect on these amendments to reduce the maximum sentence that has to be suspended. Now, I gave a quick scan of my local papers for who had got an 18-month sentence, which could now become a suspended sentence. And this was for a lady who caused unnecessary suffering of an animal and was in possession of a samurai sword. It was also for a lady for glassing a pregnant friend in the face. And another one was for coercion and controlling behaviour, and they also got a 5-year restraining order. These could all get suspended sentences now. The bill currently says that the presumption in favour of a suspended sentence need not apply if the court is of the opinion that making the order would put a particular individual at significant risk of physical or psychological harm. My amendments 48 and 53 would extend this to include the public, who are, after all, a collection of individuals, and they too deserve protecting. If the court is concerned that the offender is likely to be a danger to the public, then they should absolutely have the right to ensure they go to prison and not go back into the community on a suspended sentence. Amendments 49 and 54 change the risk level by removing the word significant. I would have thought that any identifiable risk should be covered, as these are people's lives we are talking about protecting here, and we should not be playing a game of Russian roulette with them. Ironically, it seems the Sentencing Council saw things a similar way, as they have previously listed as that is not as a reason to have a suspended sentence. Amendment 50 and 55 would mean that anyone not being sent to prison as a result of this change, who otherwise would have been, would have to be given the maximum length of suspended sentence. In other words, the sentence would hang over them for the longest possible time. They should not be given a shorter period, as could be the case with normal suspended prison sentences. New Clause 42 would ensure that those given these suspended sentences are electronically tagged throughout. Using a tag to monitor their location out of prison could make them think twice about reoffending, and if they then were to reoffend, it could make detection and resentencing much easier. The next amendments I want to talk to concern the type of offending that we are allowing to be included in this ridiculous prison avoidance legislation. There are so many offences that will be covered by this exemption, it's hard to know where to start. This has got to be addressed, and I sincerely hope the government will accept my amendments here. I think most people will believe that we've completely lost the plot if we allow some offences to be ones where prison sentences cannot generally be handed down. New Clause 44 would exclude knife crime from being one of them. I can't actually believe that I'm having to table an amendment to prevent a whole load of criminals who carry knives from being kept out of prison. Yet this is what the bill will do. Does no one anywhere actually think through what is being proposed and how it will affect public safety? It would be completely disgraceful for this government to ever claim to be serious about tackling knife crime when, under this legislation, the presumption will be that many people carrying a knife will no longer be sent to prison. How is this going to help prevent the loss of life on our streets? I will indeed.
Honourable Lady, for making this point, because many of us will have examples in our own constituencies of families that have been tragically affected by knife crime. Some of those go on to do some amazing work to try and help educate young people, but at the same time, it's important that where a sentence has been given, it is actually carried out, and that almost deterrent is in place, because yet again we're seeing from the benches opposite, from the Labour government, the removal of deterrence.
That honourable friend is absolutely right. The removal of a deterrent is what this bill is doing. And I will also mention repeat knife offenders are supposed to get a mandatory minimum 6-month immediate custodial sentence, not to be given an effective guarantee that they are likely to evade prison because their sentence is 12 months or less. Why would anyone think twice about carrying a knife if they know they are going to not see the inside of a cell and the courts will be powerless to send them to prison? I will indeed give way.
I thank the honourable member for giving way. I truly understand and appreciate the effects of knife crime, and we have all had cases in our own constituency demonstrating the devastation caused by knife crime. But does the honourable member agree that we should actually also be focusing on rehabilitation and preventing people from carrying knives. Education is so important on this issue, and this is the way forward for us to ensure that knife crime is decreased for the future.
Rehabilitation is indeed key, but so is prison. Prison is essential for people who have committed crimes. That's why prisons are about. It's about removing a danger from society. And rehabilitation is, of course, key. I will indeed.
I'm extremely grateful for my honourable friend. We hear a lot of messages opposite about rehabilitation. We hear a lot about recidivism. The most likely spur for recidivism is letting people out who will continue to do harm. We will be told by the government they're being out on licence. I wonder if my right honourable friend might invite the Minister to predict how many people we record while they're on licence, because the Justice Secretary has already described that number as too high. Will it rise as a result of this measure?
Esther McVey.
My right honourable friend makes his point clear there. I know the Minister was listening there, so I think they will be able to, I hope they'll be able to answer that question for your good self. Surely people cannot seriously think it would be acceptable, for example, that those who commit offences involving firearms or ammunition to be eligible, nor those who even commit some terror-related offences. As things stand, they would also be covered by this bill. My new clauses, 51 and 53, would amend that ludicrous position. New clause 52 would exclude burglars. We do not see nearly enough of them in courts because of the lack of detection of their crimes. So the ones we do see in court should be routinely guaranteed, right, to go to prison, not be spared jail, and that will be what happens here. New clauses 43 and 45 would mean that those assaulting our dedicated police officers or emergency workers would not be eligible for, or would be eligible for, suspended sentences, which is an absolute disgrace. And Madam Chair, I just want to mention here, when the government was in opposition, they made such a noise about emergency workers, police officers, prison officers, how they should be sent to prison. For example, the MP for Ronderen, Ogmore, brought his private member's bill in 2017-2018 about the assault on emergency workers and how the maximum prison sentence for a worker should be moved from 6 months to 1 year. And the reason is it is part of the problem that all too often people simply do not feel at the end of the process there will be justice. This is what the government said on opposition. The Right Honourable Member for Sheffield Heeley said the attitude which sadly exists across the criminal justice system, that punching or kicking someone is somehow to be accepted. We will never accept that people should be assaulted while they are doing the job, and we will do everything in our power to protect them. And the MP for Bedford said in a debate, we must put legislation in place to guarantee a tough line will be taken on anyone who assaults an emergency worker. Well, that's what the government said in opposition. They are doing the exact opposite now. Those people will now be let out on a suspended sentence. I cannot believe that the opposite benches will not join with me and vote for Amendment 43. I would like to test the will and the temperature of the House on this. Somebody had given way on. As the bill currently stands, the presumption against immediate custody will also apply to those committing a whole host of other nasty, violent and sexual crimes, all of whom will be eligible for these get-out-of-jail-free suspended sentences if they are going to be sentenced for 12 months or less for their crimes. New Clause 50 would mean that sentences with a mandatory minimum sentence would not be included and help to alleviate the damage in some cases. New Clause 54 would prevent offences that are capable of being appealed as being unduly lenient from the mandatory suspension prison sentence. The unduly lenient sentence scheme covers offences such as sexual offence, stalking, putting someone in fear of violence or serious harm or distress, controlling or coercive behaviour in an immediate, intimate or family relationship, and inflicting grievous bodily harm, unlawful wounding, amongst others. It would be a nonsense for crimes included amongst the most serious under the scheme to have been dealt with by way of a suspended sentence and not immediate custody. How would this work on appeal? Would all sentences be overturned as being unduly lenient, or would the new law trump all those schemes? My amendment would inject a bit of common sense and would avoid all of this. My other amendments mainly concern the past of the offender in question. It is bad enough for a first-time offender committing a serious crime to be avoiding prison, but serial offenders being rewarded under this new law for reoffending is outrageous. New Clause 46 would mean that any offender who had committed 3 or more offences in the preceding 12 months would not be eligible for a mandatory suspended sentence, and New Clause 47 would stop them from qualifying if they had committed 10 or more offences previously. Multiple offences, and yet the government is letting people off with a suspended sentence. I will indeed give way.
We have a situation where 80% of offenders are re-offenders. That is because of the 14 years of mess that this government is having to clear up. And we're in a situation where what the real travesty of justice is when there are no prison cells available for people who are convicted. The last government failed to build the prison places that are needed. This government will ensure that they exist, because they will always need to be. And it is like we have got the opposite benches who've left the taps turning and then whine about the flood that they let happen.
Esther McVey.
I'm glad the Honourable Lady stood up and raised this point. I remember when I was brought back into Cabinet Office, I heard these calls from the left-leaning civil service in the Department of Justice, who were also saying, let's let people out of prison. It is running too hot. We cannot. And thankfully, I stood firm, said no, so did the Conservative government. Yeah. Not like this government, who has let thousands of people out of prison and is destined to do so again. I'm afraid this is ideological. It is because the people on the opposite benches don't think people should be going to prison, or not more people should be going to prison, but they should be in the community. It is ideological. It is certainly not logical, and it certainly does not support law and order in this country. It is an absolute slap in the face for victims. I will not. So I will carry on here. New Clause 48 and 49 would mean offenders would not be eligible if they had previously been given a suspended sentence or an immediate prison sentence for the same offence. It would be ludicrous if an offender committed a burglary, say now, and went to prison for it, and then after this new legislation comes into force, they were convicted of another burglary, but instead of being given a longer prison sentence than the last one, as most people would think was fair, they would be given a suspended sentence because the court would have no other choice in many circumstances. New Clause 55 would exclude criminals who had previously breached suspended sentences on 3 or more occasions from qualifying for a suspended sentence. Now, it could be argued that if they'd have breached a suspended sentence once, then they should not qualify. And I completely agree. However, I will make it that it's a 3 strikes and the person is out. They cannot keep committing offences and just getting suspended sentences. Another strong case for at least 3 strikes and the offender is out, is covered by New Clause 61, where an offender has convicted of committing the same crime 3 or more times. So somebody who's committed the same crime 3 or more times would now only get a suspended sentence. These people should be getting appropriate prison sentences, not being guaranteed no prison sentence at all. New Clause 59 further mentions poor compliance with court orders being a reason not to suspend a sentence. If the court can see that the criminal has not complied in the past with non-custodial alternatives and therefore is highly likely to breach the suspended sentence, then they should have the option to impose immediate custody on the offender. This is in fact already in the current and past sentencing guidelines when it comes to considering an optional suspended sentence, never mind a mandatory one, which will have if this bill is brought into being. New Clause 60 would mean that offenders before the court to be sentenced for 3 or more offences at once should not be able to expect the presumption in favour of a suspended sentence to apply. And all of these examples I am given are coming from judges and lawyers. These are not possibilities, not things I've dreamt up. These are happening now. These people should be going to prison. They would be going to prison. But under the government, we're letting everybody out. Yeah. That's why I say we are dismantling law and order in this country if this bill goes through. Now, there is nothing to stop magistrates and judges handing out suspended sentences if they think they are appropriate. But these amendments would not force them to hand them out when they are clearly not appropriate, which is what the government is doing. They are tying the hand of the justice system. The government have already made amendments to their earlier legislation after presumably realising they had missed something. And I hope on reflection today they will follow suit, hearing some of the disasters that are about to befall the country because of this legislation. For example, my New Clause 56 is very similar to amendments the governments have tabled in their Gov 2 and Gov 4 to exclude those who are, for example, already subject to a suspended sentence. They've seen one loophole, but it's like a colander of loopholes. Hopefully they'll see a few more. However, they have not ensured that the bill does not apply to those on licence. My New Clause 57 says that those who have been released early from prison or on licence should not be eligible for this presumption in favour of a suspended prison sentence for offending again, when really they should be locked up. I will indeed.
I'm very conscious that what the Honourable Lady put forward is very logical and sensible and seems to be a way of going forward. But I'm also very conscious, Madam Chair, of the fact that young people in particular, they can do something wrong in life and then they can return back to the area that they came from. They're subject to peer pressure, they're subject to all the things that happens in that community. And sometimes I think that they probably need help outside of the legal system. Is that something that the Right Honourable Lady is considering when putting forward the legislation to ensure that people do get a second chance, but do get the help where they need in the constituency or locations where they live?
We all believe in second chances, and that is where the rehabilitation comes into force. What we're dealing with here are possible multiple offences, continuous offences, and already those people before the court have already had some kind of community sentence, some kind of tagging system, and they are still repeating their crime. So what we don't want to do is allow them now to think there absolutely is no deterrent. They can commit crimes as often as they want because it will only be a tiny slap on the wrist. People need to understand their actions are unacceptable. There is a victim, there is a price to pay for that. And some people will understand that and then will go on the straight and narrow and have a good life after that, but not with what is being delivered today. It says, commit a crime and you won't be doing any time. Wrong, 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 and a wrong message to send out. Now, this really should not need saying, but it seems it does. How on earth can it be right that someone has been released early from prison will then get a second get-out-of-jail card free, and this will also happen under this ludicrous legislation. New Clause 41 means that the presumption against prison should not apply to foreign nationals. If people come to this country and commit crimes serious enough to warrant a custodial sentence, then they should not be left wandering around our streets freely as a result of this bill. Foreign offenders should be deported, as protecting the public is one of the main duties of a government. I'll have to repeat that several times to the opposition. Or the government, I should say, to the government, who don't seem to understand that is a major part of their duty. And in the meantime, they should be locked up. Whilst we have to put up with our own British criminals, I do not see why we should be lenient to those who have come to this country and committed offences. I do not think the public will agree with the government's bill either. I would urge all my colleagues in the House of Commons to think long and hard about the likely consequences of this bill and the needless victims of crime it will inevitably create. Anyone who allows this bill to go through without amendments to protect the public will effectively have blood on their hands as soon as someone is injured or killed by a criminal who should have been in prison but wasn't, as a direct result of this terrible new legislation. Finally, if the bill does go ahead, then my new clause 62 would insert a sunset clause so that in 2 years' time, when we see what a catastrophic mess this bill and this government has created, we will all be glad that there can be an end in sight to it. I will indeed.
The sunset clause is it relieves the monstrous contradiction that we've had from the other side. Yeah. They have presented this legislation as an emergency measure because the prisons are too full, and yet they boast at the same time about their great expansive prison building programme. Clearly the two are at odds with one another. Who is going to be put in these prisons if this legislation persists? Yeah. That's why her sunset clause is so important.
My right honourable friend is exactly right, which is why I pointed out this is all about ideology. This isn't logic. And obviously, I mentioned the extra number of prisons started in 2020 when the previous government gave £4 billion to expand prison capacity. 3 of those prisons have been built. There was a delay, obviously slow. We were locked down for 2 years in lockdown. That's why some are now coming on board. And there will be another 3 prisons built. If people are really, really serious about cleaning up our streets, about getting crime down, about supporting victims, they would not be voting for this bill, and prison places are either here or on their way. I'm afraid, just like the prison minister has said, he only thinks 2/3 of prisoners should be in prison. Yeah, he did. No, sorry, a third. Only a third should be in prison. 2/3 should be out on the street. And that's why I say it is ideology over logic and over the public.